Awesome. This is going to be one of the more unique races that you'll see, not in New Jersey, but in the country, because we're very friendly with one another, and you don't typically see that in a lot of competitive races. I've broken bread with both of these gentlemen separately. I met David by proxy of a mutual contact, got together and had dinner, great time, one of the smartest guys that you could speak to, had a lot to say. We had a wonderful time in Marlboro. And Mike, I've come across him twice. One of the most charismatic people you ever meet. Well, wait till he starts talking, because he steals the room whenever he's there. So two fantastic guys, all right? And you don't often hear this in a lot of races. I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I'm Daniel Francisco. I'm from Manalapan, New Jersey. That's where I grew up. My parents are immigrants from Portugal. I live in Englishtown, and I'm on the council there. I've served for 2 years. I'll give you a little insight into my political adolescence. I was politically agnostic. You know, when I was a teenager, when I was 18, you couldn't get me to be interested in politics, and I went to Rutgers University. I met a bunch of activists there that were doing a lot of crazy stuff that I had never seen before, and it was intoxicating. It was a group of kids that ended up starting the organization that today is known as Project Veritas. So my wife, who's here, Heather, I met her, and then we both met at Rutgers. All of our friends are from Rutgers. She was an adjunct professor there for a little while. That is like the birthplace of my political, nations, if you will. And so we saw these activists going around harassing professors, harassing deans, harassing local politicians, and doing undercover videos on them. And I didn't really get it. I didn't really care about politics. Like I said, I was somewhat agnostic, but it was intoxicating. Speaking truth to power and seeing that you could truly irritate people in a position of power that thought they were gods, right? So we started doing things like Oprah requests into political donations of the university staff. Now, it doesn't take a doctor to understand. If you had to guess, who do you think they donate to in terms of parties? There's about 104 to 1 they donate to the Democratic Party, in academia. So I started there, and I eventually became the executive director of Project Veritas for 2 years, and I opened their first office. I'd say the landmark piece of activism that I had there was when Daryl Issa called us and asked me personally and our marketing director to go down to Richardson, Texas, to speak on behalf of an investigation that we did. Do any of you know on Fox News Lawrence Jones?
Yeah.
Okay. I hired Lawrence Jones at Project Veritas for that investigation. It was an investigation into the Obamacare Navigator program. So with the ACA, what they did was they put aside tens of millions of dollars for all of these nonprofit organizations to get baptized as Obamacare Navigators. It was actually a licensure that the federal government came up with. And Lawrence, who's a phenomenal actor, very smart kid, he and a couple of other people that we orchestrated this investigation went in and got these Navigator programs on tape committing fraud by leading the applicants coming in to lie about their health care, right? Saying that they're not smokers, lying about their weight, lying about other medical status in order to get a cheaper premium on the directory, right? Because you had to go through your state directory to sign up. The federal government wanted people on this, right? So when we proved this enormous fraud, Daryl Issa was pissed, and he called the congressional field hearing in Richardson, Texas. So that was one of my pinnacle moments in the sort of political realm, is being in Texas, looking at Pete Sessions, Daryl Issa, got to meet all of them, and they lambasted the Democratic congressman on this program, this wasteful, disgusting program. Now, I can tell you, my parents come from a very leftist country. They come from Portugal, which was ironically a fascist religious dictatorship when my father was there under a man named Salazar, if you know your history. But very leftist, right? It's very normal in my father and mother's home country to see a socialist parade like in the city with hammer and sickle flags. Like, this is not hyperbole, this is what people see. And they're like, oh, that's the Communist Party. They're just there having a rally, right? So I'm very sensitive to this stuff, and when we saw this kind of fraud, I was enthused, like, doing this kind of activism. It kind of defined my experience for a long time. Went to the private sector after that for several years, started a family. We have a 4-year-old son, live in Englishtown. And the number one space that I'm most passionate about is the Second Amendment firearms space. I spoke when I was at Project Veritas to the New Jersey Second Amendment Society, and I got to meet Alexander Rubian, who's now the president there, and I did a ton of activism with him for about 5 or 6 years, storyboarding a lot of investigations. I don't know if you guys are aware, how many of you are firearm owners or firearm enthusiasts? Okay. So you are all intimately familiar with how abusive our licensure system is, the FPIC process. I mean, Alex and I led and storyboarded investigations into police departments. You can look up on YouTube. There was one in, I believe, 2015 into Orange, New Jersey, where the detectives openly tell you that they discriminate against the applicants by their race, gender, age. They literally say we don't want old ladies having guns because they can't handle a gun properly. We don't want women having guns because they're too small. And we don't want those people. Now, mind you, this was a black man, the detective, talking about how he doesn't want those people, black people, having guns in his town. That's the kind of discrimination from a civil rights perspective that we face in this state. And that sort of inspired me to get involved in that movement. So I've given talks, across the state for about 5 or 6 years with Alex and other groups. My friends here started their own organization, formerly known as New Jersey Second Amendment Sanctuary. They're responsible for putting through a ton of measures at the county and local level, and I applaud all of their efforts too. They've done a lot in the last couple of years. And ultimately, I partnered with an organization called Firearms Policy Coalition. And how many of you know about concealed carry laws, carry privileges, right? So in New Jersey, we functionally don't have that. We have what's called justifiable need, which is a legal clause that prohibits you from being able to carry a gun on the grounds that you don't have a legally justifiable reason to carry a gun. Well, my namesake, Francisco, the case Francisco v. Cook, is in federal court. I'm a federal plaintiff to fight for your right to have that natural right to carry a firearm. And if you're following the Supreme Court, the Nisper v. Bruin case, it's going to be decided in June. When that gets decided, likely a 6-3 decision in our favor, it's going to get remanded down to my case, back down to Monmouth County Superior Court, out of federal court. And next year, you're all going to be able to carry a gun because of groups like FBC that are fighting for our rights. So I'm a huge advocate of natural rights. I've been involved in the movement in New Jersey for years. My family immigrated here in the 80s. I was born and raised here my entire life. And same thing as these two great guys. I see a guy like Smith, who to me is a total statist. I think if you were to eliminate the fact that he's pro-life and does a lot of humanitarian work, if you were able to say, all right, I'm going to mute those two words and you can't talk about that for the rest of your platform, I don't think you'd have anything to say. I mean, it's literally the only thing this man has. So I'm proud to be here with you guys. I'm thankful that you guys invited us. It's a great opportunity, and you got great people here to chat with.
I just got to add something. So I don't know if you know this, but Plumstead Township is a Second Amendment Sanctuary Township, and Ocean County is a Second Amendment Sanctuary County.
That's awesome.
Part of that group. So.
And that's thanks to these guys right here, ironically. So I appreciate that Plumstead is in support of that measure. And, there's great, I always say in the darkest recesses of hell is where you find the most hope, right? So New Jersey is a statist dump. This is the worst state in this union when it comes to civil rights and burdensome taxes and big government. And it's like that iron in the
Maybe
fire,
second
right?
worst.
Maybe second worst. But it's like being an iron in that fire, right? You get molded by that fire, and that's why our activists here are some of the best and most pure that you'll ever find. So I'm proud to be here and happy to answer any questions, and we'll kick it off to Mike.
My question is, what is your stand on pro-life issues?
So this is I'm glad you asked that, because this is an irony of this race. And if you were to delete that issue from this race and from the incumbent who's serving in this district, right? If you delete that, like I said during my speech, if you muted the pro-life issue out of this race, he's basically one of the biggest leftists in Congress you've ever met. Every single person in this race is pro-life. Every single person in this race is not going to defend the murder of babies. So it's an irony that the one thing I get told, let me explain to you how powerful Chris Smith is. I have no problem saying this openly. I spent a lot of time in DC, right? When I worked at PV and these other organizations, I know a lot of people down there. And when I formulated the idea of doing this campaign, I went down there once or twice. Do you know how many people told me that I've known for 10, 15 years that when I mentioned his name, they were like, oh yeah, we're not touching this issue. This campaign we're not going there. He's a powerful man. As much as we criticize him on his positions, he has a lot of entrenched relationships in DC. There's a reason that you're in power for 42 years. It's not an accident, okay? So on the issue of life, I mean, I made a presumption. I'm pretty sure we're all in the same position, but I'm unequivocally pro-life. I can tell you as someone that in my personal life, I've had issues in my personal life and my family with birth, with having trouble having kids. I can tell you that as I started to have a family, I realized that that's an issue that a lot of people encounter. And even though when I was younger, I might have told you I was pro-life but somewhat ambivalent, I'm maniacally pro-life now. I find the idea of, it's insane to think that during the Clinton administration, you were allowed to engage in partial birth abortion. Like, people don't even know what that is. That is one of the most grotesque, inhumane things I've ever heard of in my life. I don't even care to describe it. You can go look it up on your own. But the fact that there are people, usually in academia, that justify this kind of thing, to me it's inseparable from euthanasia, if anything else. That is not an issue that's going to be, in my view, that's not something that's going to be an issue in this race that divides anyone, because I think most people are on the same page. It's really going to be the economics, civil liberties. That's where there's going to be a stark difference between Chris Smith and the rest of the...
My question is specific.
And if you can put a gamut, pro-life has a kind of spectrum. If you can tell us where on that spectrum you stand for pro-life, that would be awesome too.
So really quickly, we'll start with Daniel, Mike, David, 1 minute, just yes or no, if there's any.
That's it, yeah.
So the Spectrum is one of my favorite games.
Yeah, that's all I have.
My favorite game. My favorite game. And I don't think my wife is going to be offended by me saying this. I've lost 3 children, okay? So trust me, if anyone understands, like, the importance of this issue, it's me. I love the Spectrum game. And I've spoken to moral relativists on the right and the left, and I go, tell me when to stop. And this is the thing. This is what you should ask people who are pro-choice. Let them pick a point, 3 months, 4 months, 30 days, and accept it. And then go, okay, I accept that your view is 3 months. Good, I'm glad you took a position. Now, will you stand in solidarity with me to support the criminalization of anyone that engages in that act after 3 months? Because you just told me you think that's where life begins. And you know what invariably they'll say? Oh, well, I wouldn't do that because I can't go there, and that's someone else's moral. They're all relativists, okay? So my point on the spectrum is 0, to be abundantly clear.
Thank you.
I'll interject real quickly, just so you see where the cultural divide has gone, which this is not going to be an issue in this room. But Governor Northam, the former governor of Virginia, are you familiar with that radio interview he did?
Yes.
Keep him comfortable.
Deliver
the baby.
And he suffered no repercussions.
That's where the culture is, right? They're talking about euthanasia. They're not talking about abortion. They're talking about murder.
That was murder.
Yeah,
Very
so
good.
they're talking.
They have it here in New Jersey. That was
New
just
Jersey's-
passed in January.
Yeah, I went to Rutgers. This was a common vernacular. It was a common substance to be discussed on campus. My wife taught there. Like, tell you any day that they'll say that's their right to do that. There's people who believe it goes up to 2 years old. Like, they're that insane. So the culture has gone far away from this point, and it's important to know that that's where the enemies are.
I have to correct you, and I know I'm giving you some fodder that probably I should reserve for Mike, but in 2017, okay, Mr. Pro-Life had an opportunity for his priority on pro-life to go straight up against his fiscal irresponsibility, and instead of showing that, hey, you know what, I'm fiscally irresponsible, but when pro-life goes against it, I'll take that. No, he did not, and he voted not to repeal and replace Obamacare when he could have, and with his vote, we might have not had it still, and which is been the greatest instruments for the left to drive home funding for abortion through Obamacare. So that's just, for feathering your cap, guys. He voted not to repeal and replace the ACA in 2017.
Right.
And that is,
It's the
it's not as
biggest.
pro-life as he's seen.
And everybody up here would have voted against the
Definitely.
ACA. Every single person would have voted against
It's,
that.
it's the biggest sin in the world to think that the federal government puts a metaphorical gun to your head and says, give me your money, and then I'm going to fund murder with it. That is one of the largest sins that I can possibly conceive. And like I said, I don't think you're going to find any distinguishment between us, even the other people in the race, but it's a very important issue, and I agree.
What did he think he was gonna do with that pro-life movement when he voted to certify the election? I mean,
Political future.
yeah.
Preservation.
So he still has a position, right, so he still has his own position.
His own position.
But I mean,
Yeah, this is going to be a relatively boring conversation because there's so many parallels, and I think we might be largely on the same page. The situation is fluid, obviously, and I'm obviously going to react as we go along. 100% will be behind whoever the ultimate, person is. I will say this much: don't underestimate the importance of culture. All right, so let's look at. I'm not even giving you an opinion or having a long-form discussion about this, but let's say the word immigration. Okay. Before even the election in 2016, the idea of talking about immigration was non-existent. And it's because one individual kind of inserted that into the public lexicon, right? And that became a topic in the debates, in a crowded field, where people got pushed to a particular direction. So the Overton window is a really real thing. And although we largely have a very similar foundation, we all have individual strengths here and unique perspectives, unique skills, unique jobs, where we will stand apart slightly from one another. So, in essence, to answer your question, sure, yeah, I'm of course going to look at this from a practical standpoint, and ultimately, like, I would love to see Chris Smith out of that seat. I've said publicly a couple of times now that as much as I have differences with some of the candidates in the race, I would take any one of the 5 of them over Chris Smith. I have no problem saying that publicly. And you see the convivial atmosphere amongst us here talking in front of you tonight.
Yeah, but my question goes to you is at what point would you make that decision? I mean, if you start going into May, then you got less.
No,
I
you
told
have
you
to
my
decide by April anyway, because then you're on the ballot regardless. So it's really like April is going to be that cutoff. So you absolutely will be sensitive to that.
This usually happens after Q1 reporting. Anyway.
Yeah.
This usually happens after the first quarter reporting, where people start
Well,
realizing.
I just want to know, some people go on though, I mean, that usually doesn't mean definitely.
I know some. I was about to say I know someone who will probably go on anyway, and she's not here.
She's in it with the $300 in her campaign account to the bitter end.
I'll say this much just so you know. So I don't even mind saying. So Tricia, right? The namesake of this when you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, because she's come at me once or twice online, which is fine. This woman knew about this conversation tonight, claimed that she wasn't invited, right? So I publicly told her on Twitter, like, yeah, they're looking for you. Come and have a conversation with the 3 of us and speak to the voters about what they care about. And instead, she proceeded to call this a boys' club, that they don't want her there, that we're all Smith plants, all this nonsense. Do you know where she is right now?
There's a bunch of women here.
Do you know where she is? She's in another district talking to their Republican club in Monroe, by where I live. So it's like, why are you politicking with people that can't even vote for you? So the summary here is, once again, like the abortion conversation, I think you're going to find that there's a convivial atmosphere here. We want Chris Smith out. We all have unique idiosyncrasies about us, and you'll probably, if you poke with enough questions, you're going to find our differences. But we ultimately want Chris Smith out, and that's the ultimate goal. So I have much less faith in the institutions of the state to believe that any sort of investigation is going to come to light and haul people off to jail, and the Guantanamo Bay is getting prepared right now. I mean, I laughed when all of those kind of things were being said in the ethos between the 2020 and 2019 era. I live in Englishtown, right? So it's a donut hole town inside of Manalapan, where I coincidentally grew up. My parents still live there. Been on the council for 2 years, and I've mentioned publicly that there's a lot of exciting stuff that we're trying to get done locally in my town, and I grew up there. I have a very sentimental connection to that area. I've promised that if by the time we get to that April, juncture, and I happen to feel like I'm in the best position to win, I 100% am going to move into the district, even though the district. Just to be clear, I was in the district. I announced in the district. Then they drew a line through Mike's town, my town, like this, going into Homedale. And if I go one town west, I'm in district, and I'm in A. I'm in my town, I'm in B, and then one town east is C. 3 different districts, right? 4, 3, and 6, to be correct, to say it correctly. So the whole question about being in the district, I grew up here my whole life. I lived in Toms River for 8 years. Like, my wife works in Ocean County. Our family's all over Monmouth County. This is my life. Like, I've actually lived here my entire life. I don't view it as a detriment that, like, oh my God, they arbitrarily drew a line yet last month and now you're not genuine. I haven't levied that criticism at anybody, and I don't think it's fair. But in the spirit of being honest, if I get to that juncture and I'm in the lead, I absolutely have no problem moving one town east, or likely even further south. We'll talk about it later.
See, I think I think Daniel's a great example.
Yeah.
So you spend your money at our businesses, you drive our roads.
I live in a
historically doing these things until gerrymandering.
Let
you know what I mean?
me explain. So Plumstead is a cool town because it gives me the vibe of my town. Like, you're relatively small.
Yeah.
My town's smaller. We have 2,000 people in our town. I know everyone, okay? When we walk around the block, we know everyone by a first name basis. My police chief, who I'm suing, is my friend and lives 3 doors down, and we drink beers every once in a while, right? Like, you have to understand that this is kind of a greater platitude, right? When you have decentralization, when you have small local government, it's harder to be a jerk to the people you represent, right? You can't be a jerk to your neighbor. You've got to live with them every day. So, like, places like Plumstead and Englishtown are a godsend. Like, this is where, like, community matters more than politics. And just like you guys knew each other, were joking at the beginning of the meeting, that's a beautiful thing, right? So this is my identity. This is where I'm from. If I have to move in 4 months, that's great. We'll do that. But the whole levying of like, oh, you're not from here, I think it's ludicrous. I don't think that's going to persuade anyone else otherwise.
So historically speaking,
Yeah, they were taking guns before Hitler during the Weimar Republic. Chairman Mao, who killed way more people than Hitler did indirectly, said a famous...
Directly.
I meant through famine and
yeah,
all this stuff. I mean, he still killed them.
60 million.
Right.
60 million.
Mao killed 50, right? So he said political power comes out of the barrel of a gun, right? I mean, go through life, Pol Pot, Pinochet, Fidel Castro, right? Chavez. Every single despot knows that the first thing you have to do is disarm the populace. So James Madison wrote the Second Amendment, and they understood the reasoning for it, like he said, has nothing to do with recreation or anything like that. This is going to sound crass. It's to give you the ability to shoot your government. That sounds crazy, but that's why it's there. And anyone that tells you that that's extreme, they're downplaying it. That's the reason for it. Did you hear what happened in Canada, like today? They are boasting with like smiles on their faces on camera that they've gotten all the money, all of the give, send, go information. Like, there's no wide gun rights, and there's a hunting culture in Canada, but you can't carry and have those kind of privileges that we have in many states here. In terms of the Second Amendment, I probably am the most extreme. Like, how old are you mind me asking?
18.
Okay, so you're young, man. So I grew up in one of the pivotal moments I remember when I was a little bit younger than you, actually substantially younger than you, like 5-6 years, was Columbine, right? When Klebold and those kids. And it's funny because culturally, politics used to be flip-flopped. Like, culturally, in the 90s, the evangelical right was very puritanical and like didn't like civil liberties and tried to downplay cultural things like violence in video games, gun ownership. You had a lot of Christian groups actually advocating for curtailing civil liberties. And the left used to be like the ones that would stand up for things and fight the power. Right? We're talking about Vietnam, right? Because of conscription, all of that type of stuff. Now it's this complete reversal, right? Now it's the evangelical left, and I say that in not a religious terms because their deity is the government. That's what they worship. They are the ones now puritanically censoring, disarming, doing all that kind of stuff. And the right has sort of become this the liberty movement, of sorts, more personified. I'll tell you this: you're a young kid. My political journey from when I was your age to where I am now is wildly different. Like what I thought when I was 18, 25, and now 35. It's a long story. I'll be happy to share it privately with you if you ever want to chat. I'll tell you a book to pick up. That's my political Bible. It's what defines almost everything I believe in. It's Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard. Tell me what your favorite part of anatomy is.
There's a line where he talks about like we are not the state because Jews didn't kill.
Can this kid run for Congress? No, I'll drop out if you want right now. You're my hero, man. No, I'm serious. Do you understand that you ask most people in Congress who Murray Rothbard is, they'll go, you're smarter than all of Congress. Like, they have no idea who that is. An Austrian economist, historian, Ludwig von Mises was his inspiration, right? That book is a phenomenal, like, compass for your soul politically. And it's so important, and it puts it in such simple terms. And it's like a bathroom read. It's like a 25-minute read, right? It's quick. And that's a great term. If you ask people, what is government? And say it in less than 3 words. Can you? Like, what would you describe government as? In less than 3 words.
Authority? No, they're not. I mean, no.
Monopoly of force.
It's legal violence. Like, that's what the government is. It's the only institution that is allowed to use violence legally against you. And Rothbard touches on that idea, but you're right. In the 1st or 2nd chapter, he brings up the Holocaust. And he goes, people say, oh, the government is us. We the people, right? The government is not we the people. Don't repeat that trope. It's a dangerous trope to repeat. It's not the people. The government is a separate entity. To say that the government is the people, and he makes the point, is to say that the Jews committed suicide in Germany. They didn't commit suicide. They were murdered by despots, okay? So it's very important that we segregate like that philosophy. God bless you for reading that book, man. I didn't know what that was when I was 18. Do you know when I read that book? 2 years ago, a year ago. Like, and now that's like my Bible from a political perspective. So gun rights, you want me to say where I stand? You should be able to own a machine gun, full automatic, without a background check, with a tank in your driveway. How extreme is that? I challenge you to find someone in Congress who will say that. I'll say it.
You're in the right town.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Oh, and by the way, one last thing. Remember the defendants in my case, okay? My police chief, who I'm friends with, the county superior court, the New Jersey State Police, and the Attorney General, okay? Do you know how many enemies I've made putting my last name and my family on the line? Do you know how many people have threatened me and also told me that my name is persona non grata in Monmouth County where I live? Like, that's no joke. Like, if you want to talk about being principled, like, go up against the police in New Jersey and the state police and then tell me you stand up for Second Amendment rights. Like, trust me, it's a slippery slope, but we're going to, there's the best part, the happy ending, we're going to win this year. You're going to be able to lawfully carry a handgun in New Jersey by next year. And it's because of the efforts by these groups and, you know, people that put themselves on the line for these cases.
All right, I will point out, I will make a little bit, since it's all been kumbaya, and I love this guy.
Yeah, let's take a dump on each other.
No, I'm not going to take a dump, but I.
Kind of along the same lines, a question for all of you. How do you guys feel about 3D printing your own firearms for your defense of your home and yourself?
3D printing firearms. I mean, it's part of the, I would agree with it, right? It's part of the Second Amendment, it's constitutional carry. If you want to 3D print firearms, I'm okay with it.
So it is being legislated away in certain jurisdictions,
New Jersey specifically.
including here in our state. 3D printing is, to the firearm world, what cryptocurrency is to the Federal Reserve. It's a direct attack on a centralized system. 3D printing is very well what may save our country. Like, this is not a joke. The fact of the matter is, like, look at all these truckers, right? Like, you realize the Ottawa police are like now doing tactical training on storming truck structures. They're doing that right now. If you watch the videos, like, they're going to hurt people. Okay, they're going to jail people. They're going to go after their assets. They're going to do what they did to the January 6th crowd very shortly in Ottawa. Okay. Do you understand how different that confrontation would be if all of those men and women had rifles? Like, don't underestimate the importance of that. Do you guys know where Coeur d'Alene, Idaho is?
Yes.
So in the Panhandle, right? It's a beautiful mountain town, like that you can see Canada, Washington, Montana, right? Beautiful town. When Antifa was running around burning San Francisco, Washington, D.C., New York City, Chicago, when they were engulfed in flames, women, man, black, white, Hispanic, were armed with rifles on slings, walking around the downtown of Coeur d'Alene. No police. Every citizen had a rifle slung, all high-fiving each other, and Antifa, the actual people with massa, were like in a line at the edge of the block, and they basically said, let's go, come on. Guess what? There was no rioting in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And it has nothing to do with the government protect you. Don't ever forget the government has no legal duty to protect you. You are responsible for yourself. So 3D printing, like, that is one of the most important issues, and that's why when it's a threat to the hegemony of the state, they will criminalize it, right? What are you seeing happening with cryptocurrencies right now? They are doing everything they can to control it and make our American fiat dollar a cryptocurrency so that they can then cancel you whenever they feel like it. Oh, you came to a public meeting and you spoke out, your bank account's frozen. You didn't pay a fine on a speeding ticket, your bank account's frozen, you can't do anything. And if you voted for the infrastructure bill, your car will be turned off electronically in 2024.
It's true.
It's going to be the rule that they can shut off your car whenever they want.
Kill switch.
All right, so 3D printing is an issue
It's
that...
already in your car right now.
Right. It's an issue that you have to pay attention to. Like, if you guys know who Cody Wilson is? Okay, so Cody Wilson runs an organization called Defense Distributed. He pioneered the initial, like, Liberator pistol, which was like a small plastic 1 or 2 shot handgun. He has now engineered a CNC mill that can take an aluminum block and turn it into a lower receiver 100%. From a 0% block to a lower receiver for a mil-spec AR-15. Do you understand that that is way more powerful than the NRA, FPC, GOA, all the gun groups combined? There is nothing the federal government can do to stop you from going in your garage and printing yourself an AR-15. That is what cryptocurrency is to the Federal Reserve. It's a shot in the heart. So that is one of the most important issues that we as activists in the Second Amendment space or in the liberty space have to become more familiar with and advocate for. Because it is your right as an American to sit in your garage if you have a mill and make a handgun. You know that's not illegal so long as you're not a prohibited person by statute, right? But you can make a firearm. You can print a handgun or a rifle. And cryptocurrency, again, the reason that we talk about inflation is because the government just infinitely prints money, right? When Chris Smith votes for all these infrastructure bills, we have $10 trillion in debt in the last 10 years. That includes President Trump. So he's part of it. Obama, everybody, right? If you take away that ability of the government to just create money out of thin air, they have no power over you, right? They can't do anything. That's why there's such a violent and swift reaction to cryptocurrency, because you're eliminating their hegemony of the financial markets. So 3D printing, crypto, that's the future. That's the future not of this country, it's the future of the liberty movement in the world, to be honest.
All right,
I appreciate your honesty, man.
I'll say real quickly, David. So for the 3D printed firearms, there's still metal parts in it, right? So you're not going to be able to take like a polymer 80, which is the gun that's drawing the ire of the ATF right now, where they're trying to regulate these 80% pistols, which means like you can print you can buy a kit where you have to chisel off like a couple of pieces and now it becomes a firearm. You can't bring any of those firearms into a stadium or airport or anything. It would set off a sensor the same way a retail Glock would or anything else.
Good.
But I'll just say to the analogy of you made the analogy about the shouting in the theater. I'll just say this distinction. It's not a one-to-one analogy in the sense of I have the ability to shout fire in a theater, right? I can walk into a theater, my vocal cords are wet, I can yell if I want to, there's nothing stopping me from exercising the ability to yell fire. Now there may be a consequence that's negative from me doing that, and I may face a consequence from that. The analogy would be, let me carry that gun into that theater. I won't shoot anyone, but don't take away my right to carry a gun into the theater. I think that's like really where the movement is like not sometimes framing this correctly, because then that becomes like a justification for, oh, well, we can't do here, we can't do there. I mean, a private property, you should be able to ban whatever you want. It's not my house, it's not my land or not my airplane, whatever. But that's like just an important distinction. It's not like, oh, those guns are hidden or you can't get through sensors or anything like that.
Good point, and I fully agree with you on cryptocurrency.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep it brief. I told Crispy that ironically, like I met Roger Stone at the RNC in Tampa, Florida in 2012, and he's an eccentric dude. He's a really fascinating guy. Look, I'm a regular person. I'm a father, a husband. I work in the energy field. I've gone through that baptism by fire in the political world when I worked at Project Veritas, and I looked at these congressmen in the face. I've been in these backroom fundraisers where you all think maybe that they hate each other. It's all kabuki theater. Like they are all laughing at the cocktail hours and at the junkets and at the bars after the lights go down and they're, stop arguing on cable TV in those little boxes. It's largely a joke for these people. I'm a political nerd. I love talking about specifics. The one story I'm going to talk about for weeks after this is the fact that you read Murray Rothbard. You may all laugh, but like that inspires me. That like someone as young as you articulated that, and that you know that, right? Like that is the future of the country. Is people understanding the dynamic of it's not a Republican Democrat thing. It's not about little individual things. It's a battle between the state and the individual. And are we maintaining our humanity and our civil liberties, right? And for me, I like to say, where do I put my money where my mouth is, right? And that's why I choose to fight in the activist realm, particularly in the Second Amendment community. And I put my name out there on a public docket against very powerful people because I believe in it and because I love it. It's a human passion for me. So for me, this is something that makes me a happy warrior. I love doing this. If it doesn't work out and one of these guys are the person, great. I'm going to be happy for them, okay? As long as we can get out a person that, in my opinion, is no different than a leftist, statist, that I think is a detriment to this district, these two counties that I've called home for my entire life, that I'm raising a family in, all right? So this this for me is a personal thing, and I'll just say anybody that wants to follow up with me, I'll leave cards in the back and talk to you. You can ask me anything you want.